Welcome everyone to the Private Equity Career Growth Management Group. Kit Lisle. I want to kind of give him an introduction. He is the founder and chairman of Aclaro Growth Partners. And he also has launched a quite well-known community for private equity-backed executives called the Operators LLC, which many of you may know or be a part of. And essentially the mandate for that is really kind of supporting the growth and development of private equity-backed executives, as well as supporting, participants in the middle market and M&A ecosystem. And prior to doing all of that, to being, the founding person of Aclaro Growth Partners and the operator, before that, Kit also served and headed M&A services for Markowitz and McNaughton Inc. So to say that Kit has a little bit of experience in private equity and M&A might be a little bit of an understatement. So we are thrilled to have him as a member of the FANG, as well as him graciously accepting the role as chairperson for the Private Equity Career Growth Group, and for bringing additional thought leadership to the FANG for the PE Special Interest Group. So without further ado, Kit, I will hand the floor over to your capable hands.
All right. Thank you, Lynn. I appreciate it. And thanks everybody for being here. I've been looking forward to this. I wonder if you can see the screen. All right. Is it visible to you now?
Yes.
Yep, we got it.
Awesome. All right. Well, Joyce, I guess you'll monitor the people that are trying to be admitted to the group.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm still adding people. They're coming in now.
Okay. Well, let's start with just a general question for everybody. Do you have any burning questions for me? Any requests? Any unmet needs or wishes or wants, and in terms of your investment of time here today and then going forward as a group? My goal here is to be a good resource for you to find your next role more efficiently and more effectively. And it's a collaborative process. So let's just start with any input, suggestions, ideas, questions that you might have.
Get your definition of private equity. Is it just growth later stage, or are you going to be including venture, search, and fundless sponsor areas?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's actually one of the first topics here today is how do we define private equity? So we'll start there. So by definition, private equity is an investment in a privately held business. So that would include venture capital. However, venture and later stage buyout are very, very different animals, but I just would include them under the same umbrella.
And what about search and fundless sponsor, independent sponsor?
Yeah,
those segments have exploded over the last 5 years.
Yep. So independent sponsors, I'd include family office and merchant banks and the like as well. So any other questions right off the bat, or suggestions, requests, areas of interest? All right. So private equity, as you have. So first of all, if you have had prior experience as a private equity backed executive, could you just let me know right now, either with a show of your hand or your voice?
Yes.
Okay. So that was Willard, I think. Anyone else?
I see.
I was an executive of a company that was acquired by private equity.
Okay, good. And I think I saw another hand.
Yeah, Scott Carbon. I've worked for several private equity companies, portfolio companies.
Yes, and everyone, you could also use the raise hands in the chat so Kit can visually see and get a sense for the group.
Okay, so private equity is a professional investment in a privately held business with the intent of selling that business in the future. So by selling, they typically use the term a liquidity event. They have a hold period of some designated period of time. For later stage private equity, it's often only about 3 to 4 years. The number of portfolio companies, anybody have any guesses how many portfolio companies there are in North America of private equity backed businesses?
A big number at this point.
Yeah, Well, it's more than 20,000. And there are more than 80,000 private equity backed executives in North America. 80,000. It's amazing. The average tenure historically has only been about 36 months, but in 2023 and 2024, as you probably are aware, the hold periods have extended a bit. So the average tenure today is about 51 months, is the most recent data point that I have seen. So as you think about a role in private equity, what you can expect is that role will be relatively short-lived, and that you will be then in career transition mode for some period of time before you find your next private equity backed role. The upside, the reason that private equity is so exciting to many is the opportunity to not only create value, but to experience a liquidity event. And that liquidity event often brings, outsized compensation. So salary levels are usually fairly, what's the right word? I wouldn't say humble, but they're not disproportionate to the size of the business. You could also expect a bonus, a small percentage of equity. 1.5% for CEO is actually a little bit less than I had expected, but I did find that data source. Historically, I think I was under the impression it was around 10% that's typically carved out for the entire management team. And then when that liquidity event, when that sale event actually happens, most members of the management team are eligible for some form of deferred compensation in the form of maybe phantom stock or options that take place then. So terms like IRR, multiple on invested capital, return on invested capital, these are important metrics for PE-backed executives. And then the concept of reinvesting, there's a book, I think the name of the author is Adam Coffey, if I remember correctly, Private Equity Playbook. He wrote a really good book.
Kid, he was actually one of our board members for my last company.
Oh, really? Fantastic.
Yeah.
So what I like about
he plugged his book every time we had a board meeting.
Well, what I like about him, Adam Coffey, is that he describes himself as a blue collar CEO. He sort of worked his way up in an organization, became the CEO, and then essentially reinvested, meaning he reinvested the earnings that he received out of that liquidity event and was able to parlay that into an investment in the company with the next private equity group. And he kept doing the same sort of thing and made an awful lot of money because he was not only successful, but he was able to participate in larger and larger private equity backed businesses. So any questions right off the bat about the private equity overview? Then we'll go to our next slide. So why is it, what's the downside? There are some risks and pitfalls and stressors. First of all, private equity culture shock. So at least one of you has been an incumbent member of a management team, meaning you were there previously, then the business was acquired by private equity. So you woke up one day and you were reporting not to the family, but to a private equity board. And that leads to private equity culture shock because there's a lot of vernacular acronyms, terms that you've never experienced before. The pace is different, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But similarly, if you were recruited from Dow or General Electric or Microsoft or whatever, you experience private equity culture shock as well. It's for a different reason, though. It might be that you expect things will be buttoned up and organized just as they were at General Electric. And they're not in a middle-sized private equity backed business. They're the systems, processes, people are just not as sophisticated as they would be at a global business. Value creation expectations are very high. So in other words, the expectation is not just organic growth, but organic plus acquisition will lead to a much larger business with a lot higher level of profitability. And in a very short period of time, i.e., let's say 36 months, and that creates a lot of stress. And the pace of change can be somewhat overwhelming. The timeline is short. It's lonely at the top. We've all heard that expression. But some people also experience imposter syndrome, and that's not a disparaging term. It's real. You know, have I, have I really, what have I committed to? What have I bit off here? Am I really capable of pulling this off? I think a lot of people experience that. And then as I said before, the systems and processes are not as sophisticated as a lot of people might have expected, but the people are in many cases an issue as well. And sometimes there's a need to replace sort of tier 2 level of the management team, and then it's very difficult to find and hire and retain good employees, and that's an issue. And you can read down the list. We don't need to go through every single one of these, but the point is, as we scroll down to the bottom, you'll expect to be in career transition mode roughly every 36 months through no fault of your own. Why? Because the scenario is often that you've done a good job as the CFO, the business is acquired, the new CEO who comes in is private equity backed as well, and has his or her own management team that he prefers to work with, he or she prefers to work with. So even though you've done a great job, you're patted on the back and maybe given a little bit of money and asked to move along. And I think for a lot of people, the first time they've experienced that, it's sort of like, well, I've been successful in life. I was a good student. I was recruited in sports. I was recruited in the business world. I've never been out of a job before. I've never been fired from a job before. This will be easy. This will be quick. This will be painless. And it's not, right? I see heads nodding and shaking.
That's me. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, what often happens is you assume, well, 3 to 6 months, and then 6 months hits and it's like, whoa, what have I done wrong? What's wrong with me? Well, there's nothing wrong with you. Obviously, you're the same person you always were. But what's lacking is a process. And so we'll get into the process, the career transition strategy and processes in just a moment. So this is probably this is a lot of words, and ideally I would have figured out how to do this on a with animation, but we'll just go through it from left to right. So 1,000 middle market private equity groups in North America. That's not right. There's more than 3,000, but 1,000 lower middle market private equity groups. Roughly 1/3 are receptive to the idea of being sort of an interim or fractional, of hiring someone on an interim or fractional basis. Why do I mention that? Because those lower middle market private equity groups often want levels of talent that they cannot afford or justify. So that's relevant to you, because if you come from a middle market sized business and you're looking for your next full-time W-2 CFO role, you might be waiting a while until that opportunity lands in your lap. So it might make sense for you to consider other options, other roles, and other scenarios that you haven't considered before. So that might mean being an interim CFO, sort of filling in temporarily, or being fractional, or maybe being an operating partner or a board member. But frankly, you could also, if you've had a lot of experience in a particular industry, for example, you could also be an expert from a due diligence standpoint and help at the LOI stage, or even before the LOI is signed up. You might even be a consultant. So in other words, my point is, if you look at the middle column there, those scenarios, there are a lot of scenarios where lower middle market private equity groups are not hiring full-time W-2 staff to support with those types of things, but they are looking for help. They are looking for input. And so there are roles that you can play while you are in career transition mode. And so you can continue to seek kind of the dream job. And while you're seeking that, you can avail yourself of other opportunities. So I said head to the operators.pe. Fang is a perfectly suitable resource for finding your next full-time role. But if you're kind of curious about some of these other opportunities, interim, fractional, et cetera, We'll talk a little bit more at the end about what the operators.pe and our platform is about.
So Kit, what's your definition of lower middle market? I've been in rooms with 5 people and they have 5 different definitions.
Yeah, there's no single consistent definition, but in my mind, 2 to 20 million of EBITDA is certainly fair game for lower middle. In other words, private equity groups that are looking to invest in platforms that have EBITDA levels in the 2 million, which is really small, to about 20 million in EBITDA. But there's, it's not hard and fast. It's just, as you said, a lot of people have a lot of different definitions. So what's the playbook? What's the process? Well, there are 14 steps in the process. We have an executive coach that we've been working with at the operators, and we've sort of arrived at this list. This is not a scientific list. I'm sure there are things that are missing. I'm sure you could combine a few things, but the content here is relevant and salient. And the idea is that, if you're that quintessential person who's been looking for a job for 6 months or a year and you're starting to panic, well, don't hit the panic button. Let's just reset and let's just think about these 14 steps in a logical order. So I'll go through them one at a time. Any questions right off the bat before we start walking through these? And my intent, by the way, is to take one at a time in the future and dive more deeply into them than we have time to do today. So the interesting thing about health and wellness is that a lot of people don't even think about it as a step in the process. I put it as the first step because if we scroll down to the last bullet point down there, those who report maintaining social connections well and are focusing on health and wellness, being healthier, self-report that they're 50% more likely to find a new job in 6 months. So being healthy, eating well, having an exercise regime, getting enough sleep, these are all important. And it all connects and ties together. 70% of job seekers experience stress, 20% report that they've experienced depression while they're looking for their next role. So, obviously, if you're stressed out and experiencing depression, it's hard to put your best foot forward and your best face into an interview. Planning ahead for financial burden. I don't know what the right length of time is. If I say 1 year and it ends up being, 18 months, then you'll be upset with me. But the idea is plan ahead, take some steps, take action as soon as you realize you're in career transition mode. Start using a budget or budget app. The best advice that I found here is focusing on home and car, because those are typically the biggest expenses. And if you can either refinance or change your insurance so that you save yourself money in that regard, that can help. But you can see you're smart people, you're finance people, so I'm sure none of this is going to be terribly enlightening for this crowd. But the idea, I thought there was something interesting, creating a no spend day or several no spend days and eliminating vice spending. I thought those were good ideas. Your personal brand. Can anybody define what I mean by personal brand? Anybody have any ideas? None? Well, the executive
value prop, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what it says. So Adriana Cowden is the executive coach that we use. She's with a firm called Be Bold Executive Coaching. And if she were giving this presentation, she would actually say your personal brand should have been the first thing listed, because from her vantage point, it's that important, and everything falls from that. It's basically your definition of who you are. And if your resume doesn't reflect that, if your LinkedIn profile says something different, if you say in an interview that your superpower is something else, you're creating brand static. You're creating conflicts and contradictions. Everything needs to be consistent. You have to have a consistent message. This is why I'm here to support, not Kit Lisle, but when you're interviewing, this is what I can help you with. this is what I can fix. This is what I can improve. This is what I can grow. This is how I can help you. And so you want to be able to articulate that clearly and with evidence. And that's what your personal brand is. And as I said, everything sort of falls out from there. Think of it as a pyramid, and at the top of the pyramid is, hey, this is my brand. And then everything is supported underneath that. Your resume, ho hum, right? The reality of it is more and more hiring decision makers are relying on LinkedIn. So the next slide is going to be about LinkedIn, but the resume, you know, it's still critically important. So the value proposition or your brand promise, your personal brand is reflected at the top of your resume. Make sure it's current and up to date. We've had some suggestions about using AI to improve your resume. Reverse engineering. Does anybody have any idea what is meant by reverse engineering your resume?
Updating it to reflect the keywords and stuff of the job that you're applying for. Is that what you mean?
Bingo. Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, literally that could be, I'm about to hit submit to send a resume in on a job that I'm really interested in. You want to look at the job description for that particular opportunity and make sure the words and phrases that are used in the job description are also showing up in your resume. You also want to put yourself into the mindset of the hiring decision maker for that job. Think about the key words they would be using to find someone to fill that role, and make sure those keywords appear in your resume so that you're going to be picked up. But even more broadly, stepping back, okay, so I've applied to, 52 jobs in the last couple of months. What do those job descriptions look like? And so you could grab all of them and analyze them and look for keywords. So keywords, phrases, consistent verbiage, those are the kinds of things you want to make sure that show up, because it's not human eyes anymore that are reviewing these thousands of resumes. The resume is a hook. It's semi-customized, but basically it's a summary. It's usually only a couple of pages. Cover letters are a way to differentiate and stand out and basically say, hey, here's why I'm relevant to you for this particular job opportunity. A lot of people do not submit cover letters anymore, but it is a way to stand out. Be careful with AI though. If you allow AI to craft your cover letter, there's a chance that AI will create a cover letter for someone else that's exactly the same as yours. So be careful with AI.
Question for you. Does with the advent of AI, do cover letters even get read? Or do you have to get through to the hiring manager, and then if they like your resume, then they read the cover letter? Like, what's the process there?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's one more step that you have to get through before the cover letter is even seen, which is why a lot fewer people today take the time and effort to write it. But the idea is, if you have an email that you can send to an actual human being, you might as well take advantage of that and send a cover letter that says, this is why I'm applying, this is why I'm relevant, this is why you should pay attention to me, because I'm, from a competitive standpoint, other people are not.
Yeah, just shape. That's perfect. Thank you.
What about your personal bio?
So there's, let's see, I'm trying to remember where I've got reference to that. Hang on one second. There we go. So the question was about your personal bio. When we get to this particular slide and we talk about messaging and outreach, you're going to develop a cadence of communications with a certain list of people who have expressed interest or receptivity in you. They might say, hey, you're a good fit for us, but we're not hiring for that position at this moment. Stay in touch, right? So one of the ways to stay in touch, look at the very, look at the third bullet. So that you do not have to say, hey, I'm just checking in, anything changed on your end, that's obnoxious, or I'm circling back, or I'm following up, or whatever the terminology might be. You want to have a legitimate reason for following up. And so personal bio, a PowerPoint deck or slide that can show a story of how you solved something, so how you were a hero in your own personal story and you created value. If you can display that in a PowerPoint, that's helpful. Or if you have content that you've created yourself that you think is impactful, meaningful, that sort of holds true to your personal brand, and you want to share that, these are all ways to offer something of substance and value to a decision maker. So we'll go back to where we were a few slides back. All right, so picking up on LinkedIn, so 95%, this kind of blew me away, of recruiters actively use LinkedIn to search for quality candidates. The about section and that the first four lines there are very, very important. You need to think about keywords. If you have not gone through your LinkedIn profile to proactively think about keywords that hiring decision makers would be using to find you, then you need to do that. You need to think about what the words are. And again, what's that word? Reverse engineering. Make sure it's I'm hearing some background. Anybody not muted that should be muted, or I'm missing a question? Okay. So grammar, syntax, style, it all matters. It all counts. So if there's a chance that you've written something in your about section, your experience section, in any content that's on your LinkedIn profile that might not be grammatically correct, then have somebody proofread it for you that can help. Photos matter. So first of all, ensure that it's a professional business photo. And then secondly, smile. That is, I don't have the statistics, but it's been proven that likability matters, and smiling indicates that you're likable. So I'm not an expert in this regard, but the true experts have shared this with me. There are 50 skills that you are allowed to put into your profile in the skills section. And most people do not take advantage of that. The reason that you should is, again, it'll be picked up in an automated search. So if you can figure out what those 50 skills are and utilize all 50. If you're not, you're leaving something on the table. Endorsements. I don't know if anybody here is in a club or a group. Do you guys in Feng use endorsement parties or endorsement groups or anything like that nature? Does that resonate? No,
I don't think so.
So the concept is you and a handful of others get together and create endorsements for one another. Like, what do you want me to say? Okay, let me type that in. And then it's reciprocal. So it sounds silly and hokey, and I frankly have never done anything like that myself, but apparently this happens and it works, and it's a good way to get endorsements created that are saying exactly what you want to be created. And guess what? It ties back to that personal brand.
So Kit, I have endorsements, but I've had them like from several jobs ago. Is it good to keep those updated, obviously?
Absolutely. So one of the things that you can do is reach out to contacts that are more recent and provide them with the endorsement that you want them to submit. In other words, do the work for them, type it up and say, hey, feel free to edit, but this is the message that I'm trying to craft for myself. If you're willing to help, I'd really appreciate it. So in other words, you're controlling, again, that brand message. And recent is obviously better. Proof points in your LinkedIn profile are important. Metrics, measurements, like it's better than saying I was successful in growing this company, by how much, over what period of time, what did you grow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So proof points. LinkedIn verified, there are a couple of different ways to do that. We don't need to get into that now, but you are much more visible to a lot more people if you are LinkedIn verified. So it behooves you to take the time and effort to figure that out. The 411 rule, anybody have any guesses about what that is?
No.
About every 4 days, you should post something on LinkedIn. For every message you post that's purely about yourself, you should post one message for someone else, about someone else, in response to what someone else posted. It's all about the algorithms, and it'll help you if you post something at least every 4 days, and not just about yourself. So
Can you define, what do you mean by that, Kit? I'm not sure I'm following. So what do you mean by not about yourself? So post it under your ID, but about the markets, or just some kind of more generic?
yeah, Jeremy, good question. So let's say hypothetically, you just posted something about the current state of M&A in 2024. What I'm saying is, from my vantage point, one post per week should be something like saying, hey, Jeremy, I really like this post, and this is exactly what I've been sensing myself, but I appreciate you sharing that article with us, right? And then my one that I post myself might be me saying, hey, I found this great article.
Gotcha.
And I agree with all these points, but one thing that's missing is X. So you're sort of sharing your perspective, your point of view. This is what I like about this article, but this is what's missing, or this is what I don't like, that sort of thing.
So it's just trying to get that engagement, right? So the more engaged you are, the higher propensity you are to be in other searches and things like that. Is that the...
That's the idea. And while we're mentioning names, I mentioned Adam Coffey. How many of you are familiar with Dan Cremons, Cremons? If you're not, write down his name and look for him on LinkedIn. He is a superstar, a rock star in the world of private equity backed executives. Purely in the sense of his communications on LinkedIn. I can't speak for his capabilities as a private equity backed executive, but I like what he does on LinkedIn. Then he wrote a book that I bought, that I read, that I don't remember the name of.
Can you spell his last name again?
C as in Charlie, and then Remons, Cremons.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Looks like the book is called Helping PE Investors Accelerate People-Powered Value Creation.
Yeah, there must be another book, because that's not the one that I read. But anyway, you found him. So Dan Cremons, good guy, and does a great job on LinkedIn. And he has a lot of people who comment on his posts. And even those comments are valuable, are really interesting to kind of keep up with. So when you're in job search mode and you're looking for your next role in private equity, what you obviously, none of you are marketing executives, so this may not be obvious, but you cannot simply send out a message to all, let's call it 3,000 private equity groups in North America. You're going to need to find those groups first, and then target which ones are most relevant to you for specific reasons, given your experiences and skills and so forth. So where can you find these private equity groups? Well, the easiest thing to do is the fourth bullet down. Easiest thing to do is to buy a pitch book, get a pitch book subscription. But guess what? The cheapest I've ever seen pitch book memberships going for is $25,000 a year. So probably may not make sense for you to do that. Private equity info is a little bit less expensive. I'm not sure about Crunchbase, but if you don't want to invest in a subscription to one of those databases, then you can do other things. You can look on LinkedIn. You can look at what executive recruiters are saying on their websites. The Association for Corporate Growth. How many of you are members of Association for Corporate Growth? Anyone ever attended an ACG meeting? I see John's hand, David.
Yes.
Willard. Okay, great. So Willard, you raised your hand.
No, just to your query.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you. I thought maybe you had a question. So I'll give you a quick overview on ACG because it's so valuable. The best chapters, so they have regional chapters and then a national event. The national event is usually in Las Vegas or Orlando or something like that. And it's expensive. To me, it's not worth it because most people who attend the national event are kind of in golf and vacation mode and so on and so forth. The regional events are a much better bang for your buck. And the best regional events are in the following cities, starting in the Southeast: Atlanta, Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago, Houston or Dallas. They alternate from year to year. And then San Francisco, then LA, not San Francisco, LA. There are probably some other events that are good as well, but those chapters have really good annual events. Now, there's an important distinction between their annual, so each regional chapter has one annual event, and then they have 12, monthly events. So figure out when the Philadelphia chapter's annual event is and try to attend. The reason is you might have 100 or more private equity groups standing behind tables waiting for you to come up and talk to them. They're there primarily for two reasons. The most important reason they're there is for an investment banker to come over to them and say, hey, I have a deal and it looks like you would be the perfect investor for this deal. Let me tell you about it. That's the main reason that they're there. But the second reason they're there is for someone to come up and say, I'm a private equity backed executive, or I'm an executive with prior experience that's relevant to you. I'd like to talk about a role with one of your portfolio companies. That's the second most important reason that they attend the ACG events. So if you haven't been to one, it's a good way to not only collect names and lists and so on and so forth, but more importantly, it's that personal human connection that is eventually, what your goal is anyway, is to get to the point of having someone who's willing to refer you to something legitimate. Does that all make sense? Okay. I'm just taking a quick look at the time. We've only got about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to go a little bit more rapidly. Any questions at this point?
I might add to your last bullet point there that lawyers and accountants and even insurance brokers can be good sources.
Absolutely. And think of these as your centers of influence, COIs. So anyone who could refer you in to a private equity group that they know and trust, that's what you're looking for, is a trusted introduction. You've got to be able to target, you don't want to send something out to every private equity group in North America. So how do you target? Well, you target based on your industry experience, the size range of deals that they invest in, what their differentiators are. If you can find anything about their culture of that particular private equity group, if you had to choose between one private equity group that is at the end of a fund and another that is at the beginning of a fund, you want to join the one that is at the beginning of the fund. And then executive recruiters can help you prioritize and focus as well. Really briefly, a personal CRM is just a way for you to organize yourself so that when you send out a message to a family office and a message to a independent sponsor and a message to a private equity group, and you do each of those 3 different times, or you send a message every 3 weeks, you're gonna lose your mind. Like, what did I send to this guy last time, and where's that message that I crafted specifically for independent sponsors? Well, your personal CRM tool, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet at the one end of the spectrum or HubSpot at the other end of the spectrum, it's up to you, but you're going to want to have some form of a customer relationship management tool that you use specifically for your job search process.
Do you have any recommendations on that, Kit, that are relatively inexpensive that?
I think HubSpot still has a free version, and it's awesome. If HubSpot has a free version still, I would recommend using HubSpot. And you can do automated messaging, sequencing. You can craft the message that you want to go out 3 weeks from now and program it to do it on the day that you set, the time you set, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Absolutely. So messaging and outreach. So when you send a message, this is a bit sophomoric, I admit, but the subject line needs to be a hook. It needs to pique curiosity, maybe ask a question, something thought-provoking. Your email should not be 5.5 paragraphs long. Private equity folks are absolutely ADD. They do not read. They don't have the time. They'll see something that either looks like an ad or a commercial or a promotional material or something that's too long, and they'll just immediately delete it. So, something short, sweet, to the point, and then always have a call to action. What's the offer? I would like to meet you for coffee in Boston. I'm going to be in town on June 25th. Let's get together on Tuesday or Wednesday. What do you have available? Short, sweet, to the point. You're looking to leverage personal connections and then ultimately ask for a referral or an introduction. Let's say hypothetically you develop rapport with a guy named Bill at ABC Capital Partners, and Bill is friendly and nice and thoughtful and provides you with time and insight, but he's not hiring right now. So at some point you need to ask Bill, hey, Bill, I'd like to help you. I'd like this to be reciprocal. And what I'm asking for from you right now is an introduction to another private equity group that you think might be relevant for me. You know a bit about me and my experiences and skills. Anybody you'd recommend? And I can put together an email for you to facilitate that introduction. That's where you're heading. We've kind of talked about ACG, but there are other conferences and seminars and association events that are relevant. Why are these irrelevant? Well, 2 reasons. One, you've got a whole host of relevant characters all in the same room at the same time, which is efficient. But secondly, it's that personal interaction that's so much more valuable than just an email or a phone call.
Hey, what about AMAA?
Yeah, that's another good one. Absolutely.
Good one? Okay.
Yeah. Turnaround Management Association, I think, is still around. That might be relevant for some of you. There's a lot of different M&A related resources. So once you get to the point of interviewing, let's say you've successfully gotten to the point of having several interviews. I don't know what the right number is, but let's say hypothetically you've had 4 interviews in the last couple of months, but you haven't received a single job offer. That might be an indication that your interviewing skills could use some refinement and improvement. So where do you improve your skills in terms of interviewing? Well, I'll just go down the list very quickly. Do your homework, know as much as you can about them, speak their language, read what kinds of verbiage they use on their website or their marketing material. Listen. Morabian's rule is that body language really, really matters. Echoing and reflecting. If somebody leans back in their chair and has a sip of coffee, well, you don't want to be obvious about it and do it immediately, but wait a few beats and then lean back in your chair and have a sip of coffee. As silly as that sounds, body language and mimicking what the other person is doing is very important. And it's because as humans, we see, similarity as approachable and friendly and less risky than someone who appears very different. So if someone's leaning back, you don't want to be leaning in. The star method situation, let me tell you about an experience I had that I'm going to answer that question. That's a great question. I'm going to answer that question by telling you a story. Well, your story needs to be using the star method. Here was the situation. This is the task that I had in front of me. This is the action steps that I took. And guess what? Here was the result. And I'm really excited to tell you about that. So you need to practice and then have questions ready for them. You can do a little Google search to look for dreaded interview questions. And we can talk about more about this later. But the idea is to practice. Something like 71% of interviewers expect to receive a thank you note, but only, I'm making these numbers up, it's roughly accurate, but only about 40% of people who interview take the time to send a thank you note. So you can stand out from the crowd by doing something that, you know, you should do anyway, send a thank you note. There's a lot here with negotiating. Let's just skip this slide. As I said, we're going to go into what I foresee happening this year, given or pending Lynn and Joyce's feedback, is I foresee that one event, one meeting will be all about negotiating. One would be about LinkedIn, one would be about your resume, and so on and so forth. So we've got plenty of content and time to delve into it. There's just a lot there with negotiating. So I think we should just move quickly ahead.
Any input on whether on your thank you note, whether to send it via email or a personal handwritten letter?
Absolutely personal handwritten. You know, you use someone who has good handwriting, send a nice card. And that requires planning ahead. Now, what you might have to do is after the interview's over, send an email and ask for, you know, mailing address. And by the way, it's a good question. The best people at this will ask for the names of the assistants who helped set up the interviews. So in other words, send a thank you note to those people who handle the logistics of getting those interviews set up, and send them a thank you note as well. Seems like a lot of work and effort, but guess what? It makes you stand out from the crowd. So this is more about after you've received your offer. So you've negotiated successfully, you've accepted the offer, you've landed. Some of the things to think about to ensure that you are not fired in the first 100 days are, you know, think about the board, think about the operating partner, relationships, communication, expectations, how feasible is the 100-day plan and their original investment thesis around the deal that caused them to buy the company that you were hired to run might be flawed. In fact, it often is flawed in some way, shape, or form. So figuring out what's missing or what's wrong or what assumptions were mistaken and how to communicate that back to the board and the CEO. Those are all important steps.
Are the 100-day plan, is that the company plan or your plan for what you're going to accomplish in 100 days?
Good question. That is a term, that's a phrase that's often used in private equity. Sometimes it's 90 days, sometimes it's 100 days. So it's usually all about the first 100 days or so that the private equity group owns the business, which may or may not coincide with your first 100 days. But in this context, I was really more thinking about your own first 100 days, because if you're not going to work out, if the board or the CEO thinks you're not going to work out, you know, the period of high risk for you is that first 100 days. If they're going to cut bait, they're going to cut bait quickly. So it's important to get it right at the start. So if you are in a state of career transition, you're not alone. About a fourth of those 80,000 private equity backed executives are in career transition mode. And I realize some of you are previously private equity backed and many of you are not, but that's okay. The average tenure, as I said, 36 months historically, and the structural barriers to networking, to working with executive recruiters, to cold calling on private equity groups, those are real structural barriers that are impeding your progress in finding your next role. And that's frustrating. So it does make sense to find help, and FANG is one resource for you. I just wanted to take a minute now, since we've only got a few minutes left, and just tell you about the Operators community platform. So we have 5 peer groups. I don't know how familiar you are with peer advisory groups, but the concept is that you often have up at night dilemmas, questions, quandaries, concerns, challenges, maybe ideas, maybe opportunities. And you'd love to have a sounding board to bounce those off of for feedback and input and advice and counsel. You don't always have it, whether you have a job currently or not. So our 5 peer groups are the Career Resource Council. As I said here, 4 goals. Number 1, just like Feng, to help you find your next role more efficiently and more effectively. Number 2, help you land in your role more effectively. Number 3, value creation. And number 4, helping to prepare for exit. So best practices and content in those areas. The second peer group is Strategic Growth Council. That group is amazing and awesome, and I love it. It's my baby. We have 10 private equity backed executives that are in Strategic Growth Council. And the reason they join Strategic Growth Council is to solve value creation or strategic growth dilemmas, questions, quandaries, concerns, challenges. And so many of the members come to each meeting each month, or come to a meeting once a month with a scowl, a frown, obvious stress on their face. And then because their peers solve that dilemma for them, they leave feeling really empowered and excited. They've got action steps. They've got a next step. The Operating Partners Roundtable is the exact same thing, but it's for operating partners. For those of you who don't know that terminology, there's been a tremendous growth in the role called operating partner in private equity. They are the wise old sages who've been there, done that. They're usually experts in either a role, like they've been CFOs 16 times, or an industry, they've spent their career in healthcare, for example, or a situation. They have a lot of experience with turnarounds or a lot of experience with globalization. So they're there to help portfolio companies, but sometimes they see a dilemma that they can't fix. They don't know how, they don't have the experience or skill or what have you. So they need each other. That's why the Operating Partners Roundtable exists. We have a council. Somebody said there's been a lot of growth in independent sponsors. These are pledge funds, search funds, fundless sponsors, private equity groups that do not have a dedicated recurring source of capital the way most private equity sponsors do. So we have an independent sponsors council to help them, because they're sort of jacks of all trades and maybe masters at only a few aspects of being a private equity investor. And the last group is the Trusted Advisors Council. So these are for service providers, law firms, accounting firms, consulting firms, executive coaches and recruiters, and so on and so forth. And they need help because it's difficult to become a trusted advisor to private equity. So that is the last slide. We have 1 minute left. I'm going to pat myself on the back for finishing 30 seconds early. Any questions?
Any recommendations on networking groups in the family office space?
Wow. No, I do not. That's another good question. Family offices are usually very hard to penetrate, to find, to tap into. I do not have any good ideas, but you could Google the term and see what you find. Sorry.
I've been looking for a year and a half. I haven't found it.
Yeah, it's tough. There are some conferences that you might be able to get yourself access to.
Yeah, but they don't show up. They will operate off conference and only show up for particular content meetings.
Yeah. Other questions?
Hey, thanks for sharing this. Any chance you can share the deck?
Yes, absolutely. I will send it to either Lynn or Joyce, and they'll make sure you get. And it is being recorded as well.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, this is great.
Super
Great
timely because
conversation.
I have a meeting in 2 hours. So,
All right. Well, best wishes with that.
thank you. I appreciate it.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't just say, look, feel free to reach out to me, Kit, at theoperators.pe. If you have any questions, or if you want to learn more about the community platform that I run called theoperators.pe, you can check out that website. We're always looking for new members as well. But Feng is a fantastic organization, and I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And I'm looking forward to running this group. So Lynn, I'll hand the microphone back over to you.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you so much for the additional insight, for the time that you spent with the group. I think this is great information, and, you know, the structured dialogue of just extending the network and, you know, providing greater resources for the PE community is definitely a very important aspect of it. So
Lynn, when is the next event? I'm confused. I thought there was gonna be like a summer recess. Wouldn't start up until the fall. Am I mixing it up with another group?
I think so. Yeah, we're scheduled to do this every other week, so twice a month. You know, we're also looking for, you know, potentially co-chairs if we want to float this, you know, weekly, that can kind of help Kit with that. And of course, that person would work very closely with Kit just to continue the dialogue. And maybe the every other week will be kind of just the elevator pitches and, you know, helping people just connect and learn more about each other. So we'll talk with that, you know, through that with Kit. But any ideas we may, Kit, if you're okay with it, also send out a survey with maybe some key questions or insights that you would like for the group, just to make it even more, you know, relatable for the group and, you know, to more targeted at some of the things of interest as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So group, I'm really looking for your input in terms of what you'd like to learn about, how this group could be helpful for you, what you'd like to get out of it, etc.
Yeah, so don't be shy. Remember to give your input. Your input is what, you know, makes these interactive group sessions, and we want to, you know, make sure it's mutually beneficial for everyone and that you get the most out of the value proposition of having a group like this.
Great, thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Kit.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye all.